This morning our topic is what makes for a great church. It's important to understand something about life. And a good school teacher, a good parent, a good friend, and a good Christian will always try to encourage the best for others. I had a school teacher once in the 6th grade who told one of the boys that he stank. Well, he did. That he'd amount to nothing. I often wondered what happened to that little boy. The reason he stank was that his family had no running water in the house. They lived just right down the road here in a log structure. But she didn't do him any favors. She put him down more than once and embarrassed him before the entire class by pulling out of her purse a bar of soap and said, "Here, take this home and use it." How'd that make you feel? Then I've had other people that went the other direction. They encouraged their family, their children, their fellow Christians, and so forth, that they're going to do good things. They're going to make an impact for good in the world. They're going to be a great father or mother, or they're going to be a great teacher. And they encouraged. This morning we need to understand something. We need to understand that the world today is, and I don't know the proper word for it, confused. As somebody said, it's a mess. We need to understand that there are a lot of things that are canceled. But Christianity is not canceled. The church isn't canceled. Christ has not gone away. There are children being born and there are people that are dying every few seconds in America. That hadn't changed. And as a congregation, we need to understand something. What makes for a great church? Now, in your hearing just a minute ago, Tom read a portion of that passage in Acts where we have the beginning of a brand new congregation of Christians. It was first made up of only Jews, and then they started preaching and teaching to the Gentiles. That church grew, and according to the scriptures and according to tradition, the church at Antioch was one of the great churches of the first century. And we'll refer to that church again in a few minutes. But our question is what we're really interested in this morning. What makes a great church? Before we get started into that, let's talk about what doesn't make a great church. One of the things that immediately comes to my mind is that a big worship building doesn't make a great church. I know that there is, in the state of Ohio, a very elaborate looking structure a denominational church decided they're going to build a new building, and they wanted it extremely elaborate. It was going to be 3 stories tall, and it is. And then the church had some division among it. And when the building was 90% completed, the church disbanded. The building is still there, and you can see it behind the weeds and the trees. Buildings don't make a church. Do you understand that the Christians of the first century knew nothing about, quote, church buildings, end quote? They met in homes. They met in caves. And the Jerusalem church met in the outer courtyard of the temple. And there have been churches that have met under trees and in barns. Buildings don't make a great church. And furthermore, riches don't make a great church. A few years ago, I read about a church in Texas back in the 1940s, I think, after the war. It was a little country church. And the oil boom was going on in Texas, and the church owned about 3 or 4 acres, and they drilled an oil well on that church property, and they found a gusher. Well, the church got together and said, what are we going to do with the money that we're going to get from this oil well? There was no discussion about sending out missionaries. The only discussion was, who's going to get the money? So they voted on it. They voted on it that the money would be divided among the members, and the church would not have any new members. Is that a great church? No, you can't be a member of this church. You get my part of my money. Popularity. And this is a proven fact in America. A large number of these great big so-called mega churches that have magnificent buildings and a great program of various and sundry kinds have a very short-lived life. And I can give you some examples of it, but not at this moment. So what makes for a great church? By the way, it's not the preacher, okay? We'll get that out of the way right away. It's not the preacher. There is one very important thing that makes for a great church. It is a congregation of Christians where the members have a love for souls. In Matthew chapter 16, and it's also found in Mark and Luke, Jesus said, the most valuable thing in this world is a human soul. It would be good for you and me to sit down quietly for a few minutes and think about, why is that so? Why is the soul of every person in this room more valuable, according to Jesus, than the whole world put together? Because this world ain't gonna last. I was talking to my banker, this past week, and they were talking about property values and all of those kinds of things. And in the course of that conversation, they said, well, you could sell this for that amount of money, or if a man owned this, he could sell it for a tremendous amount of money. And what would he get for it? Paper money. And paper money has a tendency to disappear, doesn't it? This world's going to be destroyed. Now, how long is the Lord going to let it stand? I don't know. But I do know it's not going to stand forever. Peter says it's going to be burned up. So why is a soul more valuable than this world? Because it will never die. One of the great subjects on the History Channel on TV is Adolf Hitler. He's always on there. Hitler's dead, or is he? Yes, his body's dead. But the soul that rested within that body of that notorious man is still alive. The men and women who've made up this congregation 50 years ago or 100 years ago or all the way back to 175 years ago, they're gone. Some of their grave sites are unable to be located. But they're alive. They're not here. Their body's gone. Your soul's going to live forever. And as one boy said, that's a long time. Your soul's not going to die, just your old body. So a great church is a church that loves souls. And the reason they love them is because they understand something. They understand that when this life is over and the Lord brings everything to a conclusion, there's going to be a judgment. And the righteous are going to go to an eternal life in what we might call paradise. And that word is used one time in the New Testament, and Jesus used it. We generally use the word heaven. But there will be a great mass of folks, according to Jesus, that are going to lose their soul. They're not going to die. Jesus said they're going to go into everlasting punishment. And I've heard people very foolishly describe what kind of punishment it's going to be. I don't know what kind of punishment it's going to be. There's just one thing I know about it. I don't want to be there. A church that loves souls is going to try their best to teach people about Jesus Christ and about heaven and the place of eternal punishment, to urge people to become Christians. Now, I want to stop at this point, and I want to ask you all a question. What do you want for the people you love? Let's start with parents. What do parents want for their children? You take the time sometime and ask some parents, especially of little children, what do you want for these children? Now listen to what I'm going to tell you. because this is what I've heard. I want a good education for my children. 2, I want them to get a good job. 3, I want them to be happy. 4, I want them to be financially well off. Stop right there. What do they want for their children? Everything they've named is what? It's all physical, isn't it? I've heard of mothers who said they want their daughters to be Miss Ohio or Miss Texas or whatever. Or I want my son to play professional ball. All of those things are temporary. What's the most important thing that you could wish for your children or a loved one? That they would spend eternity where there is no punishment. Because if you're going to be a professional ball player, let me tell you, that ain't going to last long at all. There's a problem with that. Well, there's injuries, I know, but there's age problem. Don't want him anymore. We got a rookie coming up that's going to do better than him. You know, when I retired from teaching college students, a thought passed through my mind. Now, I'm making a little confession right here. You ready? I thought that when I retired from that, they couldn't replace me. That was just a thought. It went by real fast. And when I went back to gather up my possessions, they had replaced me with this pretty blonde. We're not here long, folks. And what we want for people we love, and even those we don't, is we want them not to lose their soul. Now, I want to think about some examples of men who love the souls of others. And the one that immediately comes to my mind from the New Testament is the Apostle Paul. The Apostle Paul wasn't a husband. He was no daddy. He was well educated. But when he became a Christian, there was one thought that permeated the Apostle Paul's mind. And I could read you a dozen passages. That one thought was to do what the Lord asked him to do, and that was to go preach the gospel message to everybody. Did he get disappointed? All you have to do is read a little bit of the scriptures written by the apostle, and you hear disappointment all over it. Did he work hard at it? He sure did. He made tents so he wouldn't become a burden on anybody else. And he preached where it was easy, and he preached where it was hard. What was his motivation? To do the will of Christ, to preach the gospel to kings and to paupers. He loved souls. Then there was Stephen, who did the same thing, and it cost him his life. And folks, one of the great lessons in the entire New Testament, in my opinion, and I've never done it, but I've threatened to do it lots of times, is to go over there and study the 16th chapter of Romans. It's the last chapter. And nearly every Sunday school literature that I've ever picked up on Romans skips the last chapter. For some reason, the Holy Spirit left it there. What is in that 16th chapter? If you don't know, I'm telling you right now. It's a list of things that Paul wrote about people. Now, I think I counted them the other day just to make sure, and then I got distracted for something. I don't know if my number was correct or not. I think there's 26 names in that chapter. He says, greet so-and-so. The name I can't even pronounce correctly. Because he says there were females in that list who helped promote the gospel of Christ in some way or other. When I was at church camp in Fall Creek Falls, Tennessee, one year as a counselor, a 16-year-old boy was at that camp, and he was a nice, clean, good young man. He came to me one evening about dark and said, Mr. Morgan, I want you to baptize me. I want to become a Christian. And about 9 o'clock that night, we went down to the river with flashlights and so forth, and I baptized him into Christ. He was in high school, and he attended a congregation where I didn't preach. Then he grew up, or he was 16 and went off to college later. And I lost track of him for a while. And later, I found out something about this young man. His parents were not Christians. He loved his mom and daddy. So he decided that he was going to discuss becoming a Christian with them. But he wasn't going to do it just one Saturday afternoon after lunch or something. He prepared a whole series of articles or outlines, I guess they should probably be called, of things that he wanted to say to them. And he did. And he did. And he did. And he did. Why? He loved his mom and daddy. But he also loved their souls. His efforts were all in vain. But then he said, I'm going elsewhere. To this day, I do not know, only the God of heaven knows, who are Christians today because of this young man's efforts. He's a deacon in the church, I understand. But the thing that I love most about that young man is his love for souls. There's another man who lived over on Possum Run Road. You know where that is? Where Walmart is. The ski, what do they call it? Ski trails or something? Whatever it is. He was a farmer over there on one of those hillsides. He married, had 2 sons, And one son was physically and emotionally handicapped. So he moved to a nearby town. There was no church. He said, if I'm going to live in this town, there's got to be a congregation of Christians here. And if there's not one, I'm going to start one. This was years ago. Probably close to 100 now. So where did he start? He went to the jail and he taught inmates. What a place to start. You want to start a congregation of Christians and you go to jail? He said those are the folks that need it most. And some of them were converted to Christ and he baptized them in a jail bathtub. And when some of them were released, they were part of that first church that was established in that town. His son became a preacher. Preached in Ohio even, and several other states that I'm familiar with. But that daddy is long gone. But the church that he helped establish is still there. What's the motivation? He loved souls. And let me quickly share with you another one. There was a county in the state of Ohio where there was a congregation of the Churches of Christ, and it was a congregation much like Perry. The building was out in the country. Most of the members back then were farmers. They weren't highly educated, but there were some young folks in their 20s in that church, and said, there's no congregation of the church in the county seat, and there should be. Much against the advice of the older men and women in that church, they decided on their own, we're going to go to the county seat and establish a church. Their first assembly of worship was in the courtroom of the courthouse. There were 17 of them, 8 of which were children. And they started going to various and sundry parts of the town and teaching, did benevolence. Today there's a church of 224 people in that town. There are thousands and thousands of examples of people in America, Christian people, who love souls. A church that has members in it that love souls is a great church, whether it's 10 people or 10,000. That's what makes a great church. My time's just about gone, but in Acts chapter 6, the elders of the church in Jerusalem were waiting on tables and feeding hungry widows, and they said, this isn't right. Somebody else can do this. What do we need to do? We need to be out there teaching. Then, now we're back to the church at Antioch. One of the things, folks, that is remarkable about the church of Antioch is that congregation was evidently made up of Jews and Gentiles that loved souls. And what did they do? I want to mention two things very quickly. They sent out the first church sent missionaries in the New Testament. A lot of men left on their own to go preach somewhere. Philip is an example of it. But the first time recorded in the New Testament that a church sent out missionaries, it was Antioch. And one of those missionaries was the Apostle Paul. It's a great church. Then, now get this, when Paul came back from that missionary journey, he'd been all around parts of Europe, been gone probably 2 years or more. When he came back, he reported to the church at Antioch. The way the New Testament records it is this way. It says that when Paul and his traveling companion got back to Antioch, they gathered the church together. And it probably wasn't on Sunday morning, because they would have gathered together anyway on Sunday morning. But they gathered the church together so they could rehearse all of the things that had happened to them and the people that had been converted to Christ on that missionary journey. You leave this building this morning knowing that one of the great churches of the first century was Antioch. A great church. You don't read a single solitary word in the New Testament about what building they met in. You don't read anything about how much money they had. By the way, you do in the book of Revelation. A certain church was rich, but the Lord said, you're poor. You don't read about their benevolence program. They may have had one. What you read about is their desire to convert souls to Christ. I leave you this morning with this prayer. I pray that you will love souls enough to talk to them about Christ. I've heard people say, well, I can't do it and make them mad. Maybe so. But that's what the Lord wants you to do. Thank you for your attention this morning, and I appreciate it very much. I hope you're resolved to live as a Christian. If you're not a Christian, and you never made that good confession, and you've never been baptized for the forgiveness of your sins, that you do that. And we can do that today. Will you respond while we stand and sing, please?